So let's examine the arches of the foot. We should by now all be able to draw a free body diagram of the foot. So it looks something like this if we draw it kind of quickly. Bones of the foot. So you've got calcaneus, talus, navicular, cuboid, and then the three cuneiforms, lateral cuneiform, intermediate cuneiform, and medial cuneiform across the front. We'll now draw in our 5 metatarsals, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it sort of rounds out the foot. Very simple drawing of what the foot might look like. Now, arches of the foot, we've got 3 arches which make up the foot. First is called the medial longitudinal arch. So the medial longitudinal arch runs from the calcaneus, it rises to the talus, and then it descends to the first 3 metatarsals. So that means that arch runs all the way up the medial side of your foot. The medial sides of the foot's here. So this is the medial longitudinal arch. Now we've got another arch that runs from the calcaneus to the cuboid and then descends to the remaining 2 metatarsals. And that's called the lateral longitudinal arch. So it starts at the calcaneus, it rises to the cuboid and then descends to the remaining 2 metatarsals. That's the lateral longitudinal arch. And the final arch is called the transverse arch, which occurs at the juncture between the tarsal bones and the metatarsals. That's called the transverse arch. Now, when I've said before it rises and then descends, we've got this term that we call keystones. And the best way to explain a keystone is if we draw a little man sort of under an archway. It's hard to draw an arch. I draw a man sort of standing under an arch. The keystone is this very top stone, so it's the high point of the arch. So when I mentioned before that the calcaneus rises to the talus, that means that this arch is on the way up. So it's a very steep rise up to the talus and then a more steady descend down to those first 3 metatarsals. The cuboid is actually lower than the talus, which means the keystone for the lateral longitudinal arch, being the cuboid, is slightly lower and it takes longer to get there. So it rises from the calcaneus up to the cuboid and then descends to the remaining 2 metatarsals. If I were to draw this side on, it would look like this. This dot represents the calcaneus. The medial longitudinal arch would rise up to the talus, I'll put a T there, and then descend to metatarsals, 1, 2, and 3. Whereas if I were to draw the lateral longitudinal arch, it would go from the calcaneus, it would rise a little bit slower and further forward to the cuboid, and then descend to the remaining 2 metatarsals. So metatarsals 4 and 5. So we can see in the foot here we've got this nice curve, and we're looking here at the lateral longitudinal arch because we're on the lateral side of the foot, and made up of many small bones. So part of the reason for having so many small bones is to allow this arch to work. And the arch works by creating that sort of shock absorption, or works like a spring. So it does 2 things. Number 1, it creates shock absorption. It's the body's natural shock absorber. And then also, upon releasing, it works like a spring to help us propel ourselves forward. If I were to draw a picture of this, it would look something like this. There's my foot, the ground underneath my foot. It's best to think of the arch as a spring. So if the arch is sort of works like a spring, that when this arch collapses, the spring helps to shock absorb, and then upon release of that spring, it helps to propel our body in a forward direction.